Welcome to Southern Steep, the public health and social justice podcast brought to you by NASTAD, a nonprofit, nonpartisan association mission to end the intersecting epidemics of HIV, viral hepatitis, and related conditions. Much like Brewing Stronger Tea, this platform aims to brew a stronger community by centering community leaders' voices and their innovative work in the Southern United States.
Hi, Rodderick. How's it going?
Hi, Nicole. I am well. How are you?
I am doing really, really well. It is fabulous to be here with you today, and I'm looking forward to the conversation at hand. We've got some really special guests and kind of feeding two birds with one scone. We've got two guests today, and I'm excited to see it.
I love the feeling of two birds with one scone. I love it.
You know, we're here to talk about good things today and healing and all that. Why have animal violence? Before we introduce our guests and really get into the meat of our conversation today, I want to give a brief content warning for our listeners that we'll be discussing trauma-informed approaches and healing today. And with those topics, typically trauma is also brought up too. So we wanted to provide a little bit of a blanket statement for y'all before we jump in and introduce our guests. So just wanted to give a little heads up. So as I mentioned at the front of this episode, we have some special guests here today, and we have two of them. And I would love to get us started with our introductions. So our first guest today is Kelly Ross Davis. And Kelly has worked at the University of Alabama at Birmingham for the past 25 years and currently serves as a program director for the UAB 1917 HIV Outpatient Clinic. Kelly has a bachelor's degree with the University of Arizona in Economics and International Studies and a master's degree from Colorado State University in Student Affairs and Higher Education. Somehow her education does connect to her current work. She found her passion for HIV in graduate school while working in the Office of Service Learning, where she coordinated alternative weekend experiences in Denver, Colorado. She came to the South as an AmeriCorps member with the National AIDS Fund, which led to her unexpected 25-year journey at the 1917 clinic. In her current role, Kelly has provided and trained others to provide sexual health and HIV education and HIV testing and counseling in the community. She currently directs prevention, testing, linkage, and retention efforts, community engagement, and develops and implements 1917 clinic staff education, including coordinating trauma-informed approaches. She oversees a small and amazing team of staff, interns, and volunteers. For over 10 years, Kelly served as an adjunct faculty at Samford University, where she taught sex-positive human sexuality. Kelly is originally from Canada, loves to travel, read, and walk, and embraces lifelong learning. Welcome, Kelly.
Thanks so much, Nicole.
Our next guest is Mahelet Kebede. Mahelet is a senior manager on the organizational excellence team at NASTAD. She leads the trauma-informed approaches, organizational culture, and workplace wellness portfolio and provides technical assistance to health department HIV programs and harm reduction programs. Before NASTAD, Mahelet worked in the nonprofit sector, bridging public health and healthcare on the systems level to create equitable communities and improve population health. Mahelet received her master's in public health and global community health and behavioral sciences from Tulane University and her bachelor's in arts in sociology from the University of Maryland. Welcome, Mahelet.
Thanks, Nicole. I'm glad to be here today.
So, is this y'all's first podcast?
So for me, it is actually not. This is the second time I have been a guest on a podcast, but I still feel very special and famous to be on this here Southern Steep today. Kelly, I don't know about you, though.
I think this is my first podcast. So yeah, no wonder I'm a little nervous. Oh my gosh. And especially I'm in such good company. Y'all, I'm just going to do a shout out from the beginning that Mahelet, like I'm a fangirl. And Kathy Gaddis, who is our director of social services here at the 1917 Clinic, and myself have been very fortunate to have known her for a while now and all her good work. And so being with her and Nicole and now meeting Rodderick, like, wow.
Well, the feeling is mutual. We're big fans of you and your work too, Kelly, and are really, really happy that we can be here for your very first time. And Mahelet, we're glad that you got a little experience done before you can come be with Rodderick and I, because it's going to be a doozy.
Buckle up, ladies. We're going to have a good time.
Here we go. So I'm going to, Rodderick, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Nicole. All right. So as Nicole stated earlier, we will be talking about trauma on this episode. So let's just get into it. We definitely want to talk about trauma and its impact on HIV prevention and care. And we want to talk about healing and how do we support and facilitate healing. So I have a question for both Mahelet and Kelly. Can you define trauma?
Kelly, should I get us started and then I'll kick it over to you? Yeah. Thanks for that question, Rodderick. I actually think it's a really important one. Typically when I'm doing like a training or a presentation or what have you on behalf of NASTAD around trauma-informed approaches, that is what I start off with is a definition. But I always give a disclaimer of this is the definition that we are operating off of. But there's a lot of definitions of trauma that are out there, and we don't necessarily feel like one is more correct than, another. This is just the one that we use at NASTAD, and how we define it is experiences that that folks have had, that lead to psychological, mental, or behavioral change or impact. And that you can see those experiences manifesting typically through a person's behavior, or sometimes like their perspective or outlooks on the world. But Kelly, is there anything you would add or caveat to that?
I think that's a great framework. Yes. And I think sometimes, working in a clinic setting, we have emergency vehicles driving by all the time, and people think of trauma as sort of a specifically kind of a physical thing that happens. And so to just really help people understand this broader concept of trauma that can look, many different ways, and how people then respond to that trauma, like you said, how that, may play out in people's lives many years after an event or sometimes ongoing events have happened. And for us to be aware of that is just so huge in the work that we do. And I guess that we all have it. I mean, like, this is not something, certainly we know in our clinic population, it's definitely higher than average, but most people can relate to having something that's happened in their life that sticks with them and that sometimes plays out in different ways that can be a little bit hard to sort out.
Yeah, I love what you mentioned, Kelly, about how a lot of people assume that trauma is often like body trauma. But for me, in terms of health, I always try to look at my health from a holistic perspective when I'm looking at body, mind, and spirit. And just as you can experience trauma to the body, you can also experience trauma within your mental health. So I'm happy that you really mentioned that. Okay, so what does it mean to be more healing centered? And I like the sound of this, more healing centered. Like, yes, let's talk about the healing.
Yeah, thanks, Rodderick, for that question. And this is actually like a relatively new space for NASTAD to be really talking about centering healing. And the reason that we sort of landed at this place is over the last 2 years, NASTAD has been working on updating our trauma-informed approaches toolkit, which is really like our landmark resource in this, area of work. And as we were reflecting on the original toolkit that was actually published back in 2018, and a lot of like the feedback that we had heard from folks while, sort of taking the show on the road, so to speak, with the toolkit, was just like, this has been really helpful to better understand maybe certain behaviors or responses we've seen in the folks that we work with. But also, like, I want to feel like, what is that, like, light at the end of the tunnel? What's the kind of hopefulness? And also for folks who either have experienced significant trauma, maybe they're living with HIV, saying, like, I'm so much more than my experiences of trauma. And so it was a really great, like, challenge to us. And I appreciated the pushback that folks were giving, because without getting too much into it, there's been a lot of critiques actually of the trauma-informed approaches field of work, in that trauma has been pathologized. And what we mean, and what folks mean by saying pathologized, is that it has become almost like this diagnosis for something like, for example, a disease, right? What we know about disease is, like, once you have it, there's not necessarily a cure, right? Like, there are treatments that are available. There's certain care that you could provide that's tailored to address that disease. But trauma is not like that, right? Like, there's no prescriptions that exist for an experience of trauma. And what we know about trauma is that you can heal from it. It's possible. Plenty of people have. No, it doesn't take away that traumatic experience you had, but you can learn ways to kind of cope with that. And there's ways to mitigate the impact that trauma has had on you. So in developing this updated version of the toolkit, we thought to ourselves, okay, well, what would be that, that balance if, trauma-informed approaches on one hand is sort of living in a space of, okay, folks have experienced a lot of trauma. What are we going to do about that? I think, like, on the other hand, it is healing, right? And just recognizing that healing happens in relationship. And whether you have experienced significant trauma or not, it's generally healthy, right, to address the holistic aspect, and create spaces, programs, and services that are really centered on healing. And so what we did was adopt a definition from Dr. Sean Ginwright. And really, healing-centered engagement is like this useful framework to address that deficit-framed perspective of a trauma-based narrative. And it's important when you consider, right, the impacts of other things, like the impact of racism on individuals, communities, and systems, and really healing from those experiences and addressing symptoms of oppression. So to borrow Dr. Sean Ginwright's description of healing-centered engagement, it is a holistic approach to trauma that involves culture, spirituality, civic action, and collective healing. Healing-centered engagement expands upon trauma-informed care through its strengths-based, collective view of healing that does not limit trauma to experience of an individual and offers a more holistic approach to fostering well-being.
So I know, like, this healing-centered term, I think it's so important for us to incorporate into the trauma-informed approaches that we're trying to apply. And if we're not looking at them hand in hand, it's really difficult. Like, so, certainly we talk about adverse events that have happened, and they may be individual, they may be organizational, they may be societal, but we also have protective factors that balance that out. And ideally people have some of both. And so to me, the healing centered is really building on that, sort of, and I kind of give credit to social workers more of a kind of strength-based approach to healing that really looks at the whole person and things that have brought them healing in the past when they've been through hard things. What is their support system look like? And sometimes it can just be one person. Even getting a new HIV diagnosis, is there one person that's going to help sort of balance this out and provide some of those protective factors? But really, that this isn't a clinical definition. This is really a strengths-based approach to look at that holistic view of healing and recentering culture and identity as a central feature of well-being. That's part of, we're all able to really continue to grow and to either build on existing skills, learn new skills. I know for me, when I think about even learning in life and how that's such an important thing for me, like relearning things and unlearning things, equally as important.
Thank you for that. I'm so here that we're talking about what does being healing centered looks like, and from a holistic standpoint. Like, I'm happy that these doctors are looking at it from that standpoint, where we're looking at how is trauma impacting your body, mind, and spirit, and how can we heal all three to have the wholeness of a person. Like, I really, really appreciate that. All right. So, Kelly, I have a question for you about your clinic. What ways do trauma show up for some of your clients with your team at the 1917 clinic?
I think in so many ways. So I might talk specifically about some of the work I do is more really starting with the status neutral approach of HIV testing. So anybody can come into our clinic and ask for an HIV test, and they may be a patient partner, they may be, someone that Googled us. Usually that's the most common way. And they're walking in here for the first time, and it can be intimidating. And especially when people have when people are sort of seeking out an HIV test, is often because they're concerned about something. And so just being able to provide, like, it starts from the time people walk in the building, or even, I guess, even when they're looking us up online and what that might look like, but certainly when they're walking into our clinic, and that it feels safe. And so to help bring down, some of that fear that people may have, how someone's received at the front desk, how we have a form that people fill out. So ideally, it can even be like, I don't even want to have to come in and say I need an HIV test to somebody at the front desk. And then when we're meeting with someone in a room, that, we can provide that safe space for people to you really feel how they feel. And it is all over the spectrum, from something, oh, this is sort of routine for me, and, low key, to someone that does have a lot of worry and concern about talking about stuff that, like, okay, I am always aware I'm a white woman in my 50s. I don't look like a lot of people that are walking in here. And I know that automatically I have work to do to build trust and to help this feel like a safe space for somebody that is, again, maybe feeling a lot of different things. I think within our clinic, in general, if someone's walking in here for the first time with a new diagnosis already, and that the experience has to be holistic. So it has to be how we respond from, like, our building space, our front desk space, the next person someone's going to meet with, all the touch points somebody may have. And our front desk is so important. I think any front desk, because there can be triggers when someone walks in, and it's not something you would necessarily connect with. Like, we talk about what, someone's perfume, or the lighting, or like fear of they might run into someone they know, or just all those things. And it might play out with the person they first approach at the front desk. So we've really been trying to support our front desk a little bit more with how to be able to respond, and at the same time, making sure they feel safe with what in their role as well. So many ways, and just so many, the frustrations, I think, of sometimes just dealing with everyday life on top of what may have, someone's experienced in the past. Like, even just the challenges of, getting to the clinic and overcoming a lot of things that they had to do to walk in that door, that when people may respond in a way that, isn't, can be a little bit, you hear their frustration, sort of finding the balance of being able to receive that and know it's okay. This is probably not about the person sitting at the front desk. This is, how someone's, just in the moment, what it took them to show up at that front desk.
I have years of experience in testing and counseling, so I completely understand everything you said. Because, like most times, a lot of clients are very nervous when they're coming in to get a routine HIV screening test done, and that is generational trauma from when the pandemic first happened, and people were afraid of getting a diagnosis because that was a death sentence. And even though we're in like a different time where getting an HIV diagnosis is not a death sentence, and people are living happy lives and healthy lives. People are still very scared and get very nervous. So it's definitely important to make sure that you establish the space as a safe space. I love what you guys are doing in terms of, working with the front desk receptionists to make sure that their introduction is feeling of a safe space as they walk in the door. So I love that. Love that.
And then I think, the next steps of, being trauma informed is also about like, okay, if this is someone's first time coming to see us, like going through like our process, like, first of all, like, okay, asking an initial question about how they're doing. And sometimes that opens up all sorts of discussion, but making sure people do know, okay, this is the process that we're going to go through, and that people have choices. So, trauma informed, one of the key principles is giving people choices. So at any point, if someone doesn't want to answer a question that we're going to ask them, that they have permission to skip that question, and that we're explaining when I'm asking a question about have you had sex without a condom in the last month, like it's kind of upfront and personal, like why am I asking that question? And okay, yeah, it's specific to the test we're going to use. We want to make sure we know about if there's a recent exposure that we might need to think about retesting or a different kind of test. So, just giving people the information so they can feel informed, and asking for permission. We also incorporate a lot of motivational interviewing. So even asking permission, like, would you like to talk about risk reduction? Would you like to talk about, some of the things that have worked for some other people, or, things like that? And people, again, have choices.
I really appreciate you tying things back to some of the trauma-informed approaches principles. And similarly to Rodderick, I got started as an HIV tester and counselor. And sometimes just honestly thanking someone for coming in can really go a long way. We have no idea how many, buses they had to catch. Was there even an opportunity to eat lunch that day? Like, we don't know a lot of the things that happen before they get into that seat in front of us. And just saying thank you can really help with creating a space where you see that it took a lot to get there. As an HIV tester and counselor, I had a lot of folks that came in that shared that they hadn't gotten a test in a long time because the last time they received a test, it was such a negative experience for them. And so I appreciate what you were saying, Kelly, about how things really start before they even get into that seat. But we know that with status neutral care and the continuum, a lot of it happens at that HIV test, where after their result, they can go into a prevention pathway or a care pathway. But depending on how that experience goes with the tester, or even trying to get to the test, if someone has a runaround or a negative experience, that could really impact if they get into either pathway. Just one last thing. I think just going back to the basics of customer service and how to treat people warmly with respect and like affirming folks when they come in can really be such a awesome approach. It's not necessarily innovative to have a nice front desk, but it can go a long way.
Absolutely. And Nicole, to your point, I mean, we really did, when we started doing HIV testing around 2004, I think, we really listened to the stories of our folks who were living with HIV, who were our patients, about their experiences that were often really harmful as far as getting when they got their diagnosis. And we knew we wanted to design something that was different than that, based on hearing their stories and their experiences, and sort of amazing that they made it into care. And we know sometimes people really delay care based on how that first encounter went.
Yeah, I appreciate the conversation that you all are having. I think for those of you who know me know that I tend to sit on the care and treatment side, but having this conversation around testing is really making me reflect back on when we were updating the trauma-informed approaches toolkit. This time around, we were able to engage an advisory council that was made up of technical experts, lived experts, and health department staff. And I was particularly moved by one of the experiences that someone on our advisory council shared about when they first received their diagnosis. And so he had shared that he, had taken the test and was sitting in the exam room waiting for his results. And he could overhear a conversation that was happening right outside of the door of two of the staff at the clinic who were like, well, I don't want to give him his results. It's positive. Like, well, you do it. I don't want to, and could hear this back and forth. And like, that is mortifying. Right? Like, you can try to imagine, but it's just a lot. There's the stigma behind that, right? Of like, nobody wants to be the person to share this news, because to what you were reflecting on earlier, Rodderick, it's not a death sentence anymore, but they're almost treating it like it is. Like, I don't want to go and say like this huge thing. And like empathy, of course, for testing counselors, that's not, it's not the easiest job in the world. I feel that. Also, there are certain ways that we have to like care for these diagnoses and the delivery, right, of these diagnoses, care for that process in a way that's empathetic. And then there's the other part of this of like, also now he's grappling with learning that his test came out as reactive, and he's just sitting in an exam room by himself. So it's just like this double whammy of like, why do they not want to deliver this diagnosis to me, right? Is it that horrible? But then also like, this is news that I'm getting about, my health status, and I'm just sitting here by myself hearing it through a door. But fast forward, I think the really promising side of this, and now connecting it to the trauma-informed principles, as you've both reflected on, a couple of them, empowerment, voice, and choice, and that he was really fortunate in that he had a relationship with a provider who was from his home country and was able to talk to that person afterwards and ask questions like, what is a T cell count? Or what's my CD4? And all of these things that came up during the visit, but no one really walked him through it. And so he was reflecting on like, if I didn't have that peer support from this person who happens to be like a friend of mine, but also is a provider and can like explain all of these things to me from that medical side, I don't know if I would have as quickly gotten into care and started taking my ARVs, as quickly as I did. Having somebody to kind of guide me through and walk me through that after this really traumatizing experience of, the way my diagnosis was delivered, I might not be, kind of where I am at today. And so he just, and really thankful to him for just sharing that experience. And, that informed the way we framed certain things in the toolkit as well. So I think everything you all just shared with this just resonates. And we have, stories, experiences that are literally that, like what you all were just describing, that we've got some lessons to learn from, and to ensure that this field of healthcare, whether it be on the prevention side or on the care side, is not creating unnecessary trauma in folks' lives. Like, there's already all this other stuff that's happening. This system of care that we are implementing does not need to be yet another source of traumatization for the individuals that we're working with. Yeah. So I just wanted to share that.
Okay, can I just snap for the kids right quick? Because that is so key. Like, we don't want to re-traumatize people. We want to help with trauma in spaces when we can. And, I think for the HIV testers and counselors, like, I definitely understand, like, you go through your training, and a lot of times, at least in my case, like, I didn't get a positive until like months after like my training. So I was nervous as hell, and I had to step out of the room. But also, like, things like going into a private setting and speaking to your supervisor, make sure that, the noisemaker is on outside the door so people won't hear the conversation. conversation. Like, there's ways to go about navigating the space where you're still able to get the support you need to do what you need to do as a counselor in the situation, while also still helping the client.
I'll never forget my first reactive result. And similarly to you, Rodderick, I didn't get my first one till a couple months after I became a certified tester. But once I started testing like 9 to 5 days a week, there were some times where I might have 2 reactives in a row. It just, or someone could be a tester for years and they never have a reactive result. So yeah, just snaps to HIV testers and counselors, because they really are such a frontline part of this work, and so much of someone's prevention and care journey can start with them.
Yeah, and I think providing that training, I mean, I think that's trauma informed. When we think of providing training, that's that's so important that that we have that skill set to have hard conversations, and it could, because it's, that exact moment is so important, and that we're not, I think, re-traumatizing people. And I think we could talk more broadly about the healthcare system in general, that sometimes we know we are re-traumatizing people when people have to enter into, even, I mean, going to the emergency department. And we actually have an HIV testing project with our university emergency department. And that's already a hard place to be when you're, if you're showing up there for whatever reason, and then we're providing opt-out testing, that giving that diagnosis is really important. And the next steps that follow are so important. And sometimes if we can have one of our linkage counselors that can be down there right away, or we have little cards that people get in the emergency department, so they have someone to reach out to, is so important. But we know in the health system that it's a hard system to navigate in so many ways. It can be, we are obviously far from perfect. We have a lot of work to do. I think at my institution, we're trying to do more. We're trying to certainly be aware of, the intersection of trauma and Rodderick, like you mentioned, all the historic racism, all the things. We're in the South. We have a lot of isms that are alive and unwell. And so how we're addressing that within our healthcare system is, we've got work to do. And I think we're making some important steps, because for us, I mean, a lot of HIV testing happens outside of like people kind of like us who have some training in what we're doing. And so it can be people that test people for a whole lot of different things. And so making sure, we're doing, as best if we can be helping them in learning how to deliver results, or at least being the very clear next step for folks to make sure they get the added information, just like Mahelet, like your example, like there's the next person to turn to.
Yeah, I appreciate this conversation so much, and just like hearing you all's reflections, because what I didn't mention earlier is I actually did not get my start as a HIV tester or counselor. So, I appreciate hearing what your experiences are from a side of this that, like, I have not experienced being that part of the workforce, and it's making me reflect on something else now. Just in and hearing how we're even framing the role of a tester or counselor, there was again like some kind of pushback and challenge from some members of the toolkit advisory panel. There was one person who specifically, like, this quote will never ever leave my mind. They said that HIV is my superpower. And it was when we were having a conversation around like some of the stigma that exists. And the pushback that this group of lived experts was sharing is like, well, why do we make it such a big thing? Like, just if from the jump we had started out as if like, this is no different than testing. And I mean, we do a blood test to find out whether or not we have diabetes, right? Was like, if we just frame this as diabetes, and it's like, you tested positive for diabetes. Okay. Unless you can self-manage, through, active lifestyle, changing, right, nutrition, diet, etc., you're going to probably have to take a pill or insulin. But like, what if we just approached HIV in that way? And so even sometimes when we frame things like, oh, the job of an HIV counselor or tester is like so difficult, like maybe this is actually us who needs to be challenging ourselves of like, is it hard because the world is a place that stigmatizes HIV, right? What if we pushed back on the norms of HIV being a diagnosis that like you don't want? What if it was like any other diagnosis? I mean, no one wants to be diagnosed with diabetes, right? But if we're going to be real with ourselves, getting a diabetes diagnosis is not the same as getting an HIV diagnosis. So do we almost need to take a few steps back to mitigating the stigma that even exists around HIV and challenging ourselves to like, let's say maybe it's not hard to be an HIV tester or counselor, right? Like, I think there's just, I guess what I'm saying is like grappling with the world that we live in today is a stigmatizing world. And the bottom line is it is challenging, right? But what can we also, while acknowledging that is the world that we live in today, what is the parallel process for us to begin to kind of challenge ourselves and maybe rework the ways that we're showing up, in that it's totally normal to receive an HIV diagnosis. You can live a safe, not safe, but like happy and healthy life for the rest of the time that you are here on this earth by taking a pill a day. The same way that, to the earlier example I had given you all of the person who was just called their provider, was going through like CD4 T cells, like what are these sorts of things? The provider, another fun thing that provider offered was like, think of this as like your birth control pill. Like, you got to take one every day. That's all it is. Like, what if we kind of challenged ourselves, I guess, and shifted it to a responsibility that we have to just even approach our roles in a different way than maybe we have in the past. So I just wanted to offer that as like, I mean, talking to this group of folks really challenged me. Like, there's certainly a lot of things I have to unlearn. And I think as a field, we need to unlearn if we are truly going to make this space healing centered. So I just wanted to offer that as well.
But I definitely agree with you. I think we've done a lot to sort of isolate HIV in some ways. I mean, we do have some special funding that we get specifically for HIV. We've done, and a lot of things have sort of been good in that we've done that. And the Ryan White model should be out there for everybody. But at the same time, can we normalize this like any other chronic healthcare issue, which, yes, is something we have to pay attention to, absolutely. And do we have to not have it be still all the stigma that to this day, I think is still one of the biggest barriers for people getting tested or getting in care, as much as we're doing, obviously we had all the COVID things, but, that there has been a lot of outreach. And when we do, health fairs, it's like you can get screened for lots of different things, including HIV. So I think we've made some shifts back there in that kind of framework where it's like, yeah, this is a healthcare issue to think about and to pay attention to. And there's resources, again, by the benefit of getting tested and knowing your status. There's benefits on the prevention side. There's benefits on the care side. And we can really talk about it in that context. It does normalize HIV testing and maybe even normalize sexual health while we're at it, and all the other things that surround HIV that we could surely be a lot more comfortable talking about.
Absolutely. And, you bring us to a really natural segue to talk a little bit more about integrating trauma-informed approaches into our work. And a really big piece of that is the language that we use and how we talk about things. So I know that, Kelly, you've taught sex-positive sexual health, but I think that ultimately, as a field, if we can be more talking about sex positivity, how can I support you in feeling good, like using that type of language? When I was at the Biomedical HIV Summit, Dr. Dimitri Deskalakis gave a plenary presentation, and he was talking about the importance of including healing in our work and just overall like reframing a lot of this. And he gave an acronym for PTSD as a reframe, and that was prevention that supports desire. And so I loved that so much so that I wrote it down and I'm talking about it here. But in addition to language and how we talk about risk, there's a whole campaign about that's through ViiV Healthcare about risk to reasons and shifting the way we talk about getting into prevention or getting into care or getting into other services. Like there's reasons for that instead of talking risk-based language. But what are some other ways that organizations can integrate, shifting their language? But I've shared one example, but what are some other ways to integrate trauma-informed approaches into the work?
First of all, I'm still loving this prevention that supports desire. I love that. And just the idea that we can talk more in the frame of pleasure. That, I mean, a lot of, when people sometimes get an HIV diagnosis, that wasn't their goal. Their goal was often sexual pleasure. And that's a pretty normal thing that most of us could say we enjoy, and we can seek out. And so then to be looking at ways that we support that desire and honor that and love that, and weave in prevention, I think is, I would call that very sex positive. And I have to say that I love, that I taught human sexuality at a university that's a Southern Baptist university here in the South. And so, okay, if I was allowed to do that there, and it was really, I think it was very healing for people that we know that faith is a big, huge, important thing in the South for a lot of people. And that sometimes that's another place where I think it's so important to be able to talk more openly about sexual health from a sex positive framework, because a lot of people, sort of these things have to be mutually exclusive rather than, sort of honoring, again, that more holistic person. Being a trauma informed is, I think it is about honoring people's holistic selves and focusing on that wellness and goodness and love.
And, folks that are listening are able to learn a little bit more about integrating trauma-informed approaches into their work through the handy-dandy NASTAD toolkit that Mahelet's brought up a couple of times. Mahelet, can you briefly share a little bit about what the toolkit includes, who can utilize it and benefit from it?
Yeah, thanks, Nicole, for that question. So the toolkit includes some actual tools and assessments that you can, kind of the hope at least is that you can pick it up and go with it as a worksheet. There's also a good amount of the toolkit that's really just explaining things, attempting to demystify. To borrow the words of Dr. Eddie Mochtinger, who's one of the sort of foremost leaders in trauma-informed care, specifically for folks living with HIV, trying to demystify what's happening. And so it's broken up into a couple of sections, both on the actual tools and assessment side, and then on the let's demystify trauma and help you try to understand and just kind of wrap your mind around the different facets of it. So we give just like some intro around like language concepts that are important to TIA. So things like inequities, intersectionality, defining trauma, like we were talking about earlier, and defining healing-centered engagement, like we were talking about earlier. And then we shift into the more holistic understanding that researchers have been using as of late to understand trauma, which is NEAR science, and NEAR is an acronym for neurobiology, epigenetics, adverse childhood experiences, and resilience. And then we move into now shifting like this, our understanding of trauma, to adding that layer of the impacts of it for folks that are living with HIV. So just talking about what the opportunities are for trauma and for healing across that HIV continuum. And then we kind of like zoom out from there and talk about what is that 30,000 foot view of what trauma looks like in our environments, right? And talking about the organizations that we work in. So this is one of the new features of the toolkit in the 2022 version. We talk about organizational trauma, organizational resilience, and organizational culture, because so much of the feedback we've heard over the years is like, sure, great, understand the importance of doing this for the folks that we work with, right, that are living with HIV or could potentially acquire HIV. But like, I myself am dealing with so much stuff as a member of this workforce. And how am I supposed to get to a point where I'm providing trauma-informed services? And I have my own stuff that I'm, working through and dealing with. And then we kind of break down the workforce side of it. Again, what are those opportunities for trauma or the impact of trauma and healing opportunities for the workforce? And then finally, talking about the principles, which we've touched on a little bit today. I don't know if we've spelled out that those are the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration's 6 trauma-informed principles. So we talk again about how do you address those and incorporate them into your services, and also how you work with one another, right? Your peers, your fellow staff of your respective HIV agency. And then, of course, like I mentioned earlier, we kind of end with some of those tools and assessments that you can kind of like pick up and go as if they're worksheets.
All right, thank you for that. I think it's so important that our health departments and organizations have access to trauma-informed resources. So, when the testing counselor gets a diagnosis, they're able to handle the situation, and even in general interaction with their patients, it's just going to be important to have a trauma-informed approach in dealing with your patients, just to really ensure that people are getting the optimum care, and especially in sexual health, where a lot of things are stigmatizing, as we mentioned earlier. All right, so now I'm going to ask you all questions that we asked all of our guests about the South. And just simply, we're going to start off with, what do you love about the South?
Okay, I'll start. All right, I have to back up just for a minute, though, because I really need to do a plug, because I'm not part of NASTAD, but I'm doing a plug for this toolkit. And I've also been through a training that Nicole and Mahelet and other great people were leading. And so if y'all who might listen to this podcast do nothing else but download this toolkit, please do that. I literally have these handouts that I have posted in my office that just remind me of this work and keep it in front of me all the time. And one thing I really like about the new toolkit is these intersections that Mahelet was referencing, that, where being trauma informed is also about, how do we become more anti-racist? How do we, so it's not just about the individual. It's really, like there's 3 big things that are sort of that, what's wrong with you? What's, we used to say that versus what's happened to you versus what's strong with you. And I think the you is, it's individual, but it's also, interpersonal, organizational, at the community level, like that you is we can look at it very broadly. And so to me, like just how we're doing the work of healthcare and all the other things, having these tools is huge. So sorry, I just had to say that. And snap to Mahelet again, and all this really good work. So this toolkit is a great resource. And to me, one of the things, maybe tying into your question about the South, Rodderick, is, to me, and again, I didn't grow up in the South. I moved here, I've said 1,000 times, so 1,001 now. If you ever told me I was going to work in an HIV clinic in Birmingham, Alabama, for a Southern Baptist minister who was my first supervisor here, could never imagine that. And now I've spent half my life here. So to me, the stories are what are rich. And from the very first time I started doing this work, and I was even back in Colorado, the first person I met with HIV was leading, had created this little hospice out of his home with his partner. And this was back in the 90s. And I'm so glad I learned that right from the get-go, that people with lived experience are like the heart of what we're doing. And so making sure we're including them in the decisions we're making and planning things, so we're hiring folks, all the things, and that we're helping people tell their stories, because they're rich, not, so obviously HIV focused, but everybody's story. So that's one of the things that I most love about the South is the stories. And I do think they lead to breaking down stigma. I think they lead to healing, which again, kind of coming full circle to, the work that we're talking about today. They're healing for individuals and for communities.
I just want to say that I did not pay Kelly to say any of the things that she just said. But no, I always appreciate you, Kelly, just like hearing your excitement and your love for this work. It really it makes me like proud and just really glad that we've taken this on at NASTAD to do the trauma-informed approaches portfolio of work. And it's one of those rare occasions we tend to work at the systems level at NASTAD and, work across the states, but when we've got like a gold star of, here's some work we've been doing at the national level, but like being able to see the impact that it's had on you. And I know, in turn on the 1917 clinic in Birmingham, it just is really, really exciting. I think for me, to answer your question, Rodderick, I technically am from the South, but I probably shouldn't be saying this on this podcast, but I struggle with it because I was born in DC and I was raised in Maryland, right outside of DC. And we are technically below the Mason-Dixon line.
We are.
Right? Like you can't tell us though that we're Southern. I don't know what it is about us here. I feel like maybe it's because we've been rejected by the Deep South. They're like, no, you all are not like really the South. So I feel like in turn, we've been like, we're not going to claim the South. we're the Northeast. No, but I will say for my brief stint in the Deep South, when I was in grad school, I was in New Orleans. New Orleans is such a magical place. It's so, it's hard to put into words, but the word that I can use, I think that best captures how I feel about New Orleans, which is the extent of my experience with the South, because I'm not really from the South, like we just acknowledged, is just enchanting. Like it is just an enchanting place. The love that New Orleanians have for their city, for their state, for their home is just, it's unlike anything else I've ever seen. And I feel like that's actually reflective of the broader South, although I haven't, lived in a lot of other places in the South, but the South really rides for itself. And, I respect that, they love where they're from and they always represent the South. And I think that's great. Like my motherland is Ethiopia and I, look for any excuse to rep my set. And so I respect that in the South, folks do the same thing. So that's what I love most about it is you got to have some respect for folks who just love their hometown so much that they're always finding an excuse or reason to just, tout that they're from the South. So I think that's what I love most about it.
It's funny. The very first episode with all of the hosts, I had this same debate about if DC is the South with Isaiah. And it led to me posting like a poll on my social media platform on Facebook. And I got mixed reviews. Some people were like, absolutely not. DC is not the South. And other people were like, I can see where it's Southern.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was listening to some of your podcasts earlier on, and I was like, Nicole from Florida, and you all arguing about DC, and I'm like, oh yeah, but this is the Deep South, and I was like, hey, who would ever thought like this Canadian would be like, oh yeah, I'm the real South. Yeah, I'm just gonna claim y'all. It all counts. It's all good.
There's a lot of mixed feelings about where Florida is in the South, and I will continue to say that Florida is a very southern place, but the more south you go in Florida, the more north you are. But the more north Florida you go, the more south you are. It's complex.
I could see that, Nicole. I've never heard that framing before, but I could see where you're going with that.
Yeah, it's complex. Wow.
I would say it's all really beautiful too. Like I love being outdoors, and I just finally got to go to Savannah this last weekend, and oh my gosh, it's such a beautiful place, especially in April. Maybe it's a little sultry in July, but as is the South in general. But it really, I mean, it's so green and lush, and like in Birmingham now, we have like more city trails, and there's more, like just lots of people out moving around, and I love that.
Yeah, the plant daddy in me loves that element of the South where y'all get a lot of good sunlight, like a lot of good sunlight. You can grow your garden, you can grow your vegetables and your fruits, and just have like a tree or like a orange tree in the backyard. Like I love the plant daddy in me loves the gardening and the plant activities that you can do in the South. Kelly, how can people reach your organization or get in touch with you?
Yeah, again, thank you all for this chance to be a part of this podcast series. I've loved listening to some of the other ones, and I hope listeners will learn more about being trauma informed and just making little steps. But we have a website, 1917 Clinic. You can really Google that. You can reach me via email at Kelly Ross Davis, which is Kelly Ross Davis at uabmc.edu. Just a little bit of a mouthful. And I'm on social media. My Twitter is KRD Hope, because going back to trauma informed and being hopeful and resilient, I don't think if we don't kind of see that side of things, it's hard for me as, I guess, an internal optimist to kind of do this work day to day. So I like to be hopeful. And yes, encourage people. Obviously, if you're in the South, do you need an HIV test? Yeah, please just Google HIV testing will be one of the sites that comes up, but go anywhere. It's great to know your status and to know next steps and to know resources. And we're going to do our best to take good care of people and love people. And Nicole, one thing I meant to say earlier was U equals you. That's something going back to the prevention that supports desire. I think that's such an important message that we keep getting out there to folks. And Mahelet, to your point of like just being able to live well with HIV as a health issue that some folks face, but you can live well and you can be still loving other people and protecting them.
Thank you for that, Kelly, and thank you for joining us. You've been a fantastic guest. This has been a wonderful conversation. Mahelet, I do want to go back to you to see if we can identify how people can contact you should they have any questions about the Trauma Informed Toolkit.
So if you are interested in checking out the Trauma Informed Approaches Toolkit, which I really hope you are, you can find a link for the toolkit via the NASTAD website. But also, if you would like to direct yourself straight to the toolkit, it's nastad.org/trauma -informed approaches -toolkit. But again, if you just go to our website, you can find information through the NASTAD website as well. And thank you all again for having me. This was a lot of fun.
And just to echo everyone here, it has been a true joy getting to speak with y'all today. I know that we've had a very long conversation, which honestly, it's been so organic and lovely. I really have enjoyed ourselves. So really big shout out to you, Kelly, and the work that you're doing at 1917 Clinic. Thank you for bringing your passion to this episode. And Mahelet, I always love listening to you. I feel like I get an education every time we talk. Thank you for pouring so much of yourself into the toolkit that's benefiting so many people across the South and across the world. I don't know if we've gotten global downloads, but why not? And Rodderick, it's been a true honor getting to co-host with you and all the sultry tones that you bring to each word you say.
No, Nicole, it has been a pleasure to finally get up on the mic with you. I was excited for this today, for sure.
I know. And look at how well we flowed. Look at that. It's time for a segment we call Southern Charm. Here we highlight the work of someone or an organization that is charmingly impacting the South. And on today's episode, we're highlighting the Magic City Wellness Center. Opened in 2016 by Birmingham AIDS Outreach, the mission of the Magic City Wellness Center is to provide wellness and medical care for the LGBTQ community and their allies in a safe, welcoming, and affirming environment. They offer many services, including primary care, hormone replacement therapy, PrEP, mental health counseling, and more. And to learn more about the Magic City Wellness Center, go to www.magiccitywellnesscenter.org. Rodderick, I chose Magic City Wellness Center to keep us in the theme of Birmingham, but also because 1917 Clinic is based in the Magic City Wellness Center. And I got to pleasantly run into Kelly when I was in Birmingham a couple months ago because I was doing a training at Magic City Wellness Center. And it was such a bright, beautiful, welcoming, affirming space. And just wanted to lift that up in today's episode because I love a good tie-in. So yeah, well, that's our episode today. It's been a journey and a half. Rodderick, what a pleasure. I want to co-host with you again and can't wait.
Yeah, I'm excited to co-host with you again and, keep some great conversations like we had going today. Like today was like probably like one of my favorite conversations that I've been a host on today. Like this was really good. And thank you. I'm really happy to be a part of this experience with you and look forward to the next time that we host together.
All right. My name's Nicole Elenoff.
My name is Rodderick Shepherd and you're listening to Southern Steep.
Thanks for listening. Bye.